6:47 a.m. Tuesday. My coffee mug trembles in white-knuckled hands as steam curls like fury, watching a yellow bulldozer grin while ripping through the 1923 oak where Grandpa carved his initials. Metal teeth scream through 150 years of blood, sweat, and Texas soil. Diesel exhaust burns my throat, morning dew soaks through my slippers, and the air reeks of crushed family history. From her pristine white BMW, HOA tyrant Vivian Blackwood points like some suburban Caesar, greenlighting her community improvement pipeline. No notice, no consent, pure theft. But Little Miss Perfect forgot one tiny detail. Every drop feeding her 1,200 manicured lawns, marble bathroom sinks, infinity pools, and gold-plated toilets flows from my aquifer and ends at my valve. I'm exactly 1/4 turn away from 400 bone-dry estates and 1,200 viral social media meltdowns. Drop your state below. Would you shut off their water? Tag me with your worst HOA horror story. Let's watch Vivian's empire die of thirst before her first sprinkler stops. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. My name's Ezra Thompson, and this ranch has been bleeding Texas red since 1870, back when cowboys were real and HOAs were just a lawyer's wet dream. Great-grandfather carved these 400 acres from raw prairie with nothing but grit and a pickaxe. You can still feel the roughness of his chisel marks in the limestone foundation, still smell the history soaked into every weathered board. I inherited this slice of heaven from my dad, who got it from his dad, who got it from the old man himself. Rolling hills covered in native blue stem that whispers secrets when the wind picks up, natural springs that taste like liquid silver, and 200 head of heritage Texas longhorn whose bloodlines are older than most European countries. These aren't just cattle, they're four-legged time machines. 2 years ago, my Sarah lost her fight with cancer. 43 years of marriage vaporized in 18 months of chemo cocktails and hospital antiseptic that still haunts my nostrils. The medical bills hit harder than a summer hailstorm, but I'd have sold my soul for one more evening watching her brush her hair on the front porch while sunset turned our hills into molten gold. Then Heritage Meadows metastasized across the Johnsons' old cotton farm like suburban cancer. 300 McMansions sprouting overnight, each one demanding more water than a small town. The developer's slogan, rural charm with modern convenience, which apparently means steal the view while paving paradise. Enter Hurricane Vivian Blackwood, 52 years of pure ambition wrapped in Botox and designer suits, driving a BMW so pristine it probably gets detailed more than most people shower. This former Dallas city planner moved to rural Texas but brought every ounce of bureaucratic poison with her. Her husband Bradford plasters his ambulance chaser billboards across I-35 like legal herpes. Vivian rules Heritage Meadows like Stalin in stilettos. I've heard the horror stories. $500 fines for parking your own truck in your own driveway. Citations for mailboxes painted desert sage instead of approved beige #47. Liens filed because someone's roses grew 3 inches taller than the HOA Gestapo allowed. Not my circus, not my monkeys. Until last month, Vivian called a special community meeting, code for "Watch me flex my tiny authority." She clicked through PowerPoint slides that made paint drying look exciting, explaining her regional water infrastructure improvement project. Translation: another scheme to inflate property values. The punchline? Her pipeline needed to slice through my ranch like a concrete machete. Not around my land, not under the county road, straight through the heart of my property, including the family cemetery where Sarah sleeps alongside 4 generations of Thompsons. $15,000. That's what Queen Vivian offered for an easement across land worth more than her precious BMW. When I stood up to object, politely mind you, she actually sneered, "This meeting is for homeowners only, Mr. Thompson. Perhaps you should wait outside." The metallic taste of rage filled my mouth. But here's what Little Miss Perfect didn't know. Sometimes the quiet rancher in the back row holds all the aces. 3 days later, I'm kneeling beside Sarah's grave, pulling dandelions from around her pink granite headstone when legal papers slap me in the face. Prairie wind scattered the documents like confetti while that process server delivered Vivian's ultimatum: sign the easement or lose everything through eminent domain. The smell of fresh cemetery dirt mixed with my boiling blood as I read their threats. Sarah's headstone felt warm under my palm, probably just afternoon sun, but I like to think she was telling me to fight. What Vivian forgot in her suburban power trip? I'd inherited more than just this ranch from my family. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who stay quiet, until it's time to turn off the tap. Game on, Your Majesty. Vivian Blackwood didn't waste time twisting the knife. 3 days after serving me those papers, her husband Bradford started his legal blitzkrieg. Certified letters arrived like clockwork, thick envelopes with law firm letterhead that screamed expensive trouble from 50 yards away. The paper felt crisp and threatening between my fingers, each page reeking of that particular cologne lawyers seemed to bathe in. Desperation mixed with billable hours. Bradford's threats were surgical. Obstruction of municipal progress, delaying essential infrastructure. 30 days to comply or face federal eminent domain seizure. The man could make ordering coffee sound like a felony. But here's the thing about lawyers. They love complicated words because they think complexity equals intelligence. Sometimes they're so busy sounding smart, they forget to be careful. Meanwhile, Vivian worked her suburban magic on Heritage Meadows residents. Coffee shop whispers turned into parking lot conspiracies. That rancher's holding up progress. Some people refuse to embrace the future. He's probably just desperate for money after his wife's medical bills. The gossip mill churned faster than a politician's promises, spreading lies that stuck like burrs on wool. But I didn't get to 73 by rolling over for bullies, even ones with law degrees and HOA authority. Time for some digging. The Williamson County Courthouse smells like old leather, floor wax, and 100 years of legal battles. Down in the basement records room, fluorescent lights buzz like angry wasps while clerks guard their filing cabinets like dragons hoarding gold. I spent 3 days down there, squinting at documents older than disco, following paper trails that most folks wouldn't have the patience to pursue. That's when I found the first crack in Vivian's perfect plan. The pipeline wasn't for community benefit at all. Buried in subsection 47C of the environmental impact filing, I discovered the real beneficiary, Lone Star Aqua Solutions, a water bottling company owned by one Marcus Blackwood, Bradford's brother-in-law. This wasn't about improving infrastructure. It was about turning my family's spring water into profit margins for Vivian's extended family. Now, I'd learned something important during Sarah's medical battle when insurance companies tried every trick to deny her coverage. Eminent domain only works when the government proves genuine public benefit. If the primary beneficiary is a private company, especially one connected to the condemning authority, the entire seizure becomes legally vulnerable. Those courthouse clerks had seen this scam before and quietly pointed me toward the right precedent cases. But the courthouse basement had more surprises than a magician's hat. While researching property boundaries, I stumbled across something that made my coffee taste like liquid victory. The original 1952 survey of Heritage Meadows. Turns out, when they built their precious development, they'd been sloppy with the property lines. Their main access road, the one every single resident used to reach their suburban paradise, sat entirely on my family's land. For 70 years they'd been trespassing. Every single day. The irony tasted sweeter than Sarah's peach cobbler. Vivian was threatening to steal my land through eminent domain while her entire community was built on stolen property. I could practically hear my grandfather's ghost chuckling from the family cemetery. I hired the best surveyor in 3 counties, a meticulous German immigrant named Klaus, who measured property lines like he was defusing bombs. Klaus had survived enough property disputes to know that in Texas, ownership doesn't disappear just because someone ignores trespassing for decades. He'd watched too many HOAs assume they owned everything they touched, only to discover that adverse possession requires specific legal criteria they never bothered to meet. Klaus confirmed what the old documents suggested. Heritage Meadows had never properly acquired an easement for their access road. They'd simply assumed they owned it because they'd been using it unchallenged. My counterattack was swift and surgical. While Vivian was hosting her garden club meeting, probably planning my property's funeral, I filed a lawsuit demanding $500,000 in damages for 70 years of unauthorized road use, plus immediate cessation of trespassing. The papers were served right to her front door while she was showing off her imported roses to the other suburban queens. The look on her face, according to Klaus, who happened to be driving by, was priceless. Like someone had told her that her BMW was actually a Honda with delusions of grandeur. The sound of expensive china rattling as she slammed her teacup down carried across the perfectly manicured lawn. "That old fool doesn't know who he's messing with," she reportedly hissed to her garden club cronies, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. The metallic click of her heels on marble steps sounded like a countdown timer as she stormed inside to call Bradford. But here's what Vivian still didn't understand. In Texas, we settle disputes the old-fashioned way. We let lawyers talk while we prepare for war. And I was just getting started warming up my legal artillery. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, suburban entitlement backed by legal threats and political connections. On the other, a stubborn rancher with time to research, money to fight, and absolutely nothing left to lose. May the best property owner win. Vivian Blackwood escalated faster than a Texas tornado touching down in a trailer park. 24 hours after getting served with my trespassing lawsuit, she launched a bureaucratic blitzkrieg that would make Stalin weep with pride. Apparently, when you corner a suburban dictator, she doesn't retreat. She calls every government agency that owes her a dinner party invitation. Enter the Williamson County Health Department, armed with clipboards and the kind of righteous indignation that only comes from anonymous complaints filed by vindictive HOA presidents. The inspector, a nervous little man who sweated through his polo shirt despite the crisp morning air, arrived unannounced while I was feeding my longhorns their breakfast hay. The sweet molasses coating mixed with his drugstore cologne created an odd cocktail that reminded me of a carnival, artificial sweetness masking something rotten underneath. Anonymous complaint about unsanitary cattle operations, he announced, consulting his clipboard like Moses reading the Ten Commandments. Potential groundwater contamination from livestock waste. Anonymous, my left boot. The only person filing water quality complaints in this county was currently orchestrating my destruction from her air-conditioned war room. Mr. Sweaty Polo spent 4 hours nitpicking everything from fence post heights to water trough placement with the enthusiasm of a tax auditor finding unreported income. His tape measure clicked and whirred like some mechanical cricket, documenting every microscopic deviation from regulations that most ranchers had never heard of. The crunch of gravel under his city shoes sounded as wrong as a kazoo in a symphony orchestra. His final masterpiece? Violation notices for potential contamination sources, with a 90-day compliance deadline and $50,000 in potential fines. Potential being the magic word, meaning they had zero actual evidence, just Vivian's fever dreams about my cattle somehow poisoning water that had run clean for 150 years. But here's what neither Queen Vivian nor her clipboard commando understood. I'd been wrestling government bureaucracy since before she learned to spell Homeowners Association. Fighting Sarah's insurance battles had taught me that every regulation has loopholes big enough to drive a cattle truck through. You just need to know where to look. Turns out, agricultural operations with over a century of continuous history enjoy something beautiful called grandfather clause protection under Texas environmental law. My great-grandfather had been running cattle here since Ulysses S. Grant was president, which meant my operation was literally grandfathered in before most environmental regulations were even gleams in bureaucrats' eyes. I'd learned this little gem during a county dispute 20 years back when some paper pusher tried to force me away from the creek. The real fireworks started when my independent water analysis arrived via certified mail. My property showed water quality so pristine it could have been bottled and sold as Texas Spring Miracle Water. Heritage Meadows, however, lit up the test results like a Christmas tree in hell, elevated nitrates and chemical runoff that screamed environmental disaster in bright red numbers. The culprit? Vivian's precious HOA had been pumping their golf course and decorative ponds full of enough fertilizer and pesticides to supply a small pharmaceutical company. Their obsession with suburban perfection was actually creating a toxic soup that made my cattle operation look like an environmental sanctuary. At the next county commissioners' meeting, I arrived loaded for bear with documentation that could choke a paper shredder. Vivian sat in her usual front row throne wearing a power suit that probably cost more than my truck, drumming her manicured talons against her leather portfolio while I methodically dismantled her environmental fiction. Mr. Thompson, Commissioner Rodriguez said, studying my water reports with the intensity of a crime scene investigator, these results show your operation exceeds all environmental standards. Your grazing practices actually appear to improve local water quality. The sound of Vivian's heels clicking frantically against marble echoed through the chamber like a woodpecker having a nervous breakdown. This is obviously retaliation for our legitimate infrastructure. Mrs. Blackwood, Rodriguez interrupted with the tone of a principal addressing a lying student. Your HOA's environmental practices appear to violate multiple state water quality standards. We're recommending immediate investigation by the Texas Environmental Quality Commission. The metallic taste of sweet justice flooded my mouth as I filed formal complaints that would turn Vivian's environmental crusade into her own legal nightmare. Suddenly, Little Miss Perfect was playing defense, scrambling to explain why her community was poisoning the very water supply they claimed to protect. But I could see the desperation building in her eyes like storm clouds before a Category 5 hurricane. Cornered animals are dangerous, and Vivian Blackwood was about to prove she had more tricks than a carnival magician with a grudge. The war was just getting interesting. Vivian Blackwood's next move proved she'd graduated from suburban dictator to full-blown sociopath. When bureaucratic warfare failed, she decided to get personal, and I mean personal like a proctologist with a personal vendetta. The woman had apparently hired a private investigator to dig through my life like she was hunting for Jimmy Hoffa, and what she found were Sarah's medical bills. Within a week, rumors spread through Heritage Meadows faster than gossip at a church potluck. Poor old Ezra's financially desperate. Those cancer treatments must have bankrupted him. He's probably holding up progress just to squeeze money out of us. The lies tasted bitter as burned coffee every time I heard them repeated at Murphy's Feed Store or Rosa's Diner. But Vivian wasn't satisfied with character assassination. She organized a boycott of local businesses that dared serve me. Economic warfare that would make Tony Soprano jealous. Thompson's Feed and Supply suddenly couldn't get their usual deliveries. Martinez Auto Repair received mysterious complaints about their association with environmentally irresponsible ranchers. Even Rosa's Diner, where I'd eaten Tuesday breakfast for 15 years, got threatening calls about serving water contamination criminals. The smell of fear hung over Main Street like morning fog. Small business owners avoided eye contact when I passed, their faces twisted with the particular shame that comes from choosing survival over principle. Can't blame them. Most folks can't afford picking fights with HOA presidents who control 300 households worth of purchasing power. Then Vivian crossed the line from petty to criminal. It started with my cattle gate hanging open one Tuesday morning, 20 head of prize longhorns wandering down Farm Road 2843 like they were heading to a family reunion. The metallic clang of the gate latch echoed across the pasture, but something felt wrong. That gate had been secured the night before. I checked it twice like always. The taste of suspicion was sharp as I herded my cattle home, noticing fresh tire tracks in the mud and cigarette butts that definitely weren't mine. A week later, I found 3 fence posts cut clean through with bolt cutters, jagged metal edges reflecting morning sunlight like silver teeth. The vandals had been surgical, cutting just enough to let cattle wander without making it obvious. Anonymous complaints to animal control followed like clockwork. Neglected livestock roaming freely, dangerous animals threatening public safety. My trail cameras, installed after the first incident, caught the real criminals red-handed. Heritage Meadows security contractors, trespassing on my property at 2 a.m., faces clearly visible in infrared light as they cut fences and sabotaged gates. The footage showed them laughing while they worked, treating my livelihood like some fraternity prank. Here's what Vivian and her vandals didn't know. I'd been documenting everything with the obsessive precision that comes from fighting insurance companies during a spouse's terminal illness. Every photograph, every witness statement, every damaged fence post cataloged and dated. Sarah used to tease me about my evidence boxes, but cancer teaches you that documentation saves lives, and now it might save my ranch. I'd also learned something crucial during those courthouse research sessions. Property damage by HOA agents automatically voids their eminent domain claims under Texas law. You can't steal someone's land while simultaneously vandalizing it. Even judges find that level of hypocrisy offensive. The security contractor turned out to be a regular client of Bradford's law firm, creating a conspiracy prettier than a prosecutor's dream. The final straw came when my bank called in my ranch mortgage early, claiming property value disputes made the loan high risk. Bank President Douglas Morrison, Bradford's golf partner and Vivian's tennis instructor, suddenly discovered that my 30-year payment history meant nothing compared to HOA politics. 60 days to pay $340,000 or face foreclosure, Morrison announced with all the warmth of an IRS audit notice. The coincidence was about as subtle as a rattlesnake in a baby's crib. But Vivian had finally made the mistake I'd been waiting for. Criminal evidence and civil violations wrapped up prettier than Christmas morning. I filed police reports for vandalism and trespassing, complete with video evidence that would make any prosecutor salivate. I contacted the State Banking Commission about discriminatory lending practices, threatening to sue Morrison's bank for more money than they'd seen since the oil boom. The local newspaper devoured the story like a starving dog finds a T-bone. HOA president accused of harassment campaign against local rancher. The headline tasted sweeter than honey as Heritage Meadows residents began choosing sides like kids picking dodgeball teams. 40% of the community quietly approached me with their own HOA horror stories. Arbitrary fines, illegal surveillance, foreclosure threats for minor violations. Vivian's reign of suburban terror was finally cracking, and the sound of her empire crumbling was sweeter than church bells on Sunday morning. But I could see desperation growing in her eyes like wildfire through dry grass. Cornered predators are always most dangerous just before they're finished. Time to show her what a real Texan does when pushed too far. That night, I sat in Sarah's old reading chair, surrounded by banker's boxes that smelled like grief and bureaucracy, the paper trail of watching someone you love slip away one insurance claim at a time. The cracked leather still held her lavender scent mixed with vanilla candles, making my chest tight with memories. I was hunting for mortgage documents, desperate for some loophole to stop Morrison's bank from stealing my ranch, when my fingers brushed against something unexpected. A manila envelope marked Uncle Henry Water Company, in Sarah's careful script. Uncle Henry. Dad's quiet brother who'd inherited some utility business back in the 90s. I'd barely paid attention when he died, too busy with cattle and my own troubles. Sarah handled his paperwork because she was better with legal documents than a bull rider is with ballet. Inside was a deed that made my coffee mug slip from suddenly nerveless fingers. The ceramic explosion against hardwood cracked like thunder in the silent house. Clearwater Municipal Utilities. 100% ownership transferred to Ezra Thompson, effective October 15, 1995. Holy hell, I owned a water company, had owned it for 30 years without knowing. My hands trembled like autumn leaves as I dove deeper into the documents. Service contracts, maintenance records, customer lists that read like a census of Central Texas. Clearwater Municipal supplied water to 3 counties, including every single McMansion in Heritage Meadows through a 30-year exclusive contract signed in 2010. The monthly statements made my pulse hammer against my temples. Heritage Meadows owed $45,000 in delinquent water bills. But the real nuclear bomb was buried in the contract fine print, a moral turpitude clause that would make a lawyer weep with joy. Any customer engaging in harassment, illegal activity, or actions detrimental to community welfare could have their service terminated with 90 days' notice. The irony was so perfect it felt like Sarah reaching down from heaven to hand me a loaded gun. I speed-dialed Jim Patterson, the utility manager who'd been running operations since Uncle Henry's era. "Jim, it's Ezra Thompson. What exactly do I own here?" "Mr. Thompson," his voice crackled with excitement. "Been waiting 30 years for this call. Your uncle left specific instructions. I manage everything until you're ready for active control. Been sending quarterly reports to your late wife's attention." Sarah had been shielding me from another business headache, quietly managing utility paperwork while I focused on cattle. Even dead, she was still protecting me. Emergency consultation with Austin water rights attorney Rebecca Walsh tasted like liquid victory mixed with legal fees. I held life and death power over Heritage Meadows, with surgical precision to target individual violators without affecting schools, hospitals, or innocent families. But Rebecca's financial investigation on the Blackwoods delivered the knockout punch. $89,000 in credit card debt, Bradford's failing law practice, their mansion mortgaged twice. They were drowning in financial quicksand, betting everything on inflated property values. Suddenly, the whole conspiracy crystallized like ice forming on a windshield. The pipeline wasn't community improvement. It was Vivian's Hail Mary to avoid bankruptcy. The water bottling scheme would enrich her brother-in-law while artificially boosting Heritage Meadows' values. Her suburban empire was built on debt and desperation, held together by property speculation and sheer audacity. But I controlled the water that made her fantasy possible. The metallic taste of absolute power flooded my mouth like communion wine. For the first time since Sarah's funeral, I felt like David facing Goliath with a slingshot loaded with rocks the size of bowling balls. Vivian had brought a knife to a gunfight, but she didn't know I was holding a bazooka. Time to introduce the Queen of Heritage Meadows to the real king of her water supply. The next morning, I started building my army. Not the rifle-toting kind, but the voter registration-carrying, righteous anger-fueled kind that actually wins wars in America. Turns out Heritage Meadows was full of residents who'd had enough of Queen Vivian's suburban dictatorship. Margaret Hendricks answered her door wearing flour-dusted hands and the kind of steel magnolia smile that reminded me of Sarah. Sweet enough to fool you, tough enough to survive anything. This retired elementary school teacher had educated 3 generations of local kids, including half the current county commission. Her kitchen smelled like fresh-baked bread and coffee strong enough to raise the dead. "Ezra Thompson," she said, wiping her hands on a dish rag that had seen more battles than a Civil War surgeon. "Been waiting for someone to take that woman down. She fined my neighbor $500 for planting tomatoes in her front yard. Tomatoes. Apparently, vegetables violate Heritage Meadows' aesthetic standards, because God forbid we actually grow food in our own dirt. Dr. Susan Walsh joined our rebellion that afternoon, bringing credibility that money can't buy and medical evidence that would make a prosecutor salivate. She'd been tracking the spike in childhood respiratory issues since Heritage Meadows went chemical crazy with their landscaping. The bitter smell of over-fertilized grass made her young patients wheeze like broken accordions. "Those decorative ponds are breeding mosquitoes faster than a Louisiana swamp," she explained, spreading water quality reports across Margaret's kitchen table like battle plans. "The golf course runoff is creating algae blooms that would embarrass Lake Erie. We're literally poisoning our own children for the sake of pretty lawns." Tom Pettigrew completed our core team, a Vietnam veteran who'd survived Tet and wasn't about to surrender to some HOA princess with delusions of grandeur. His military background proved invaluable when we discovered Heritage Meadows security had been playing Big Brother with surveillance equipment that would make the NSA jealous. "Basic counterintelligence," Tom explained while teaching us to spot hidden cameras and bugs. "Vivian's been collecting blackmail material on anyone who questions her authority. Time to give her a taste of her own medicine." Our war council meetings happened in my barn, surrounded by the honest smell of hay and leather tack that couldn't be manufactured or faked. Those limestone walls had absorbed 150 years of family conversations, and now they were witnessing a revolution that would make the Boston Tea Party look like a kindergarten protest. Rebecca Walsh, my water rights attorney, broke down the legal battlefield with surgical precision. "Here's something most folks don't know about essential services. You can terminate water for contract violations or non-payment, but you must provide alternative sources and 90-day notice." The beauty was in the surgical strikes. I could target specific violators while protecting innocent families, like a legal sniper rifle. The financial warfare strategy was pure genius. That pipeline project required $8,000 special assessments per household, money that 40% of residents couldn't scrape together if their lives depended on it. When property owners default on municipal bonds, board members become personally liable for the debt. Vivian could face bankruptcy faster than a gambler in Vegas. Our evidence collection resembled a FBI sting operation run by retired teachers and angry parents. Margaret's organizational skills turned witness statements into courtroom gold, while Tom's military precision ensured every document would survive legal scrutiny. Dr. Walsh's medical credentials transformed environmental complaints into scientific fact. The community organizing phase revealed Vivian's tyranny in living color. Residents emerged from their suburban bunkers with horror stories that ranged from absurd to criminal. $200 fines for unauthorized mulch colors, forced removal of children's playsets for aesthetic violations, liens against elderly residents whose grass grew half an inch beyond regulation height. "She made Mrs. Patterson remove her Purple Heart memorial display," Tom reported with the quiet fury that preceded military action. "Said it violated neutral patriotic expression standards. Woman's husband died at Normandy Beach, and this suburban dictator calls his sacrifice aesthetically inappropriate." Our media strategy crystallized around Tom's daughter, Sarah, an investigative reporter for Austin's Channel 8 who'd been hunting for a David versus Goliath story. We were serving up a media feast that would make Thanksgiving dinner look like a light snack. Dr. Walsh organized medical professionals to testify about contamination risks, while Margaret rallied concerned parents from 3 school districts. The coalition grew organically. Teachers, veterans, doctors, and fed-up residents who'd finally found leadership worth following into battle. Technical preparation required military-level logistics applied to municipal warfare. Temporary water tanks were positioned for innocent residents. Alternative delivery contracts were negotiated with neighboring utilities. Every contingency was planned with NASA mission precision. Our evidence vault resembled a prosecutor's Christmas morning. Video footage of criminal vandalism, financial records proving corruption, environmental studies documenting contamination, witness statements exposing systematic harassment. Each box was labeled with Margaret's teacher precision, organized by Tom's military standards, and verified by Dr. Walsh's scientific methodology. As October winds carried the smell of victory across Texas prairie, our revolution was locked and loaded. Vivian had built her empire on fear and intimidation, but she'd never faced organized resistance with legal firepower and community rage. The final battle awaited. Vivian Blackwood's desperation reeked worse than a feedlot in August heat when she realized her suburban empire was cracking faster than cheap sidewalk concrete. Word of my growing resistance had spread through Heritage Meadows like wildfire, and Queen Vivian was about to prove that cornered animals do the stupidest things imaginable. Her first brilliant move was hiring some private investigator who looked like he'd flunked out of mall security school. This greasy little weasel spent a week following me around town with all the subtlety of a neon billboard advertising amateur surveillance here. The metallic click of his telephoto lens from across parking lots sounded like a mechanical cricket with delusions of competence. But Vivian's real masterstroke was attempting to bribe County Inspector Morrison, the same nervous little man who'd nitpicked my cattle operation. She offered him $5,000 cash to condemn my ranch buildings as structurally unsound and hazardous to public safety. The stench of corruption was thick as petroleum when Morrison called to confess the whole scheme. She wanted emergency condemnation orders, Morrison whispered like he was reporting a murder. Said you were threatening community water supplies. Offered me enough money for a new truck if I'd shut you down permanently. The woman had graduated from suburban dictator to federal criminal, which meant she was getting sloppy enough to make career-ending mistakes. Then she crossed into pure criminal stupidity. Tuesday morning, I was feeding my longhorns their molasses breakfast when Sheriff Rodriguez arrived with enough backup to invade a small country. The crunch of gravel under multiple patrol cars sounded like approaching thunder, and my mouth went dry as desert sand seeing their grim expressions. Anonymous tip about drug manufacturing, Rodriguez explained, his weathered face showing the particular embarrassment of investigating obviously false reports. Caller claimed you were running methamphetamine operations in your barn. The 4-hour search turned up exactly what I expected. Baking soda that some amateur genius had planted in my feed storage to simulate crystallized drugs. The white powder felt gritty between my fingers, nothing like the smooth texture of actual narcotics. Rodriguez's field test kit turned the substance bright blue, the color of innocence and incredibly stupid frame jobs. Whoever planted this watches too much Breaking Bad, Rodriguez muttered, shaking his head at the pathetic evidence. Real manufacturers don't hide drugs in cattle feed, and they sure don't use baking soda as cutting agent. But here's where Vivian's desperation became my jackpot. Security footage showed Heritage Meadows contractors planting evidence at 3 a.m., their faces clear as summer daylight in infrared video. The same geniuses who'd vandalized my property had graduated to federal evidence tampering, a felony that carries serious prison time. While I was being cleared of fictional drug charges, Bradford Blackwood launched his own legal offensive that proved lawyers can be dumber than their clients. He filed harassment lawsuits against Margaret, Dr. Walsh, and Tom, intimidation tactics designed to drain their savings through legal fees. But Bradford's fatal error came from pure arrogance. He violated attorney-client privilege by bragging about HOA legal strategy to his country club buddies. The fool actually boasted about his brilliant legal warfare over martinis, not knowing that Tom's military contacts included a retired JAG lawyer who recorded every word. Texas State Bar investigators salivate over attorney misconduct cases, especially ones involving criminal conspiracy and confidentiality violations. Bradford's law license was about to become as worthless as Confederate currency. Meanwhile, Vivian escalated to social warfare that would embarrass middle school mean girls. Emergency HOA meetings expelled dissenting residents faster than a Las Vegas divorce court. Bylaws changed daily like a rigged casino game. Foreclosure attempts against questioning families wielded HOA liens like legal weapons of mass destruction. But her unforgivable sin came Thursday morning when I discovered Sarah's grave desecrated like some horror movie nightmare. The pink granite headstone cracked down the middle, memorial flowers trampled into black mud, and a threatening note left like a serial killer's calling card: drop the lawsuits or lose everything. The metallic taste of absolute fury flooded my mouth as I knelt beside Sarah's violated resting place, touching fractured stone that bore her beloved name. Morning dew felt cold as tears on my fingertips while rage burned through my chest like molten steel. Here's what Vivian didn't understand. She just united every decent person in 3 counties against her. Desecrating graves violates something deeper than law. It violates the basic human decency separating civilization from barbarism. But her desecration had also triggered something she couldn't anticipate. My silent preparation phase was complete. Water company termination notices were drafted. Alternative supply contracts were signed, media interviews were scheduled, legal evidence was cataloged and ready for court. While Vivian was busy playing suburban terrorist, I'd been quietly loading my nuclear arsenal. The next phase wouldn't be escalation. It would be total annihilation of everything she'd built. Time to show this grave-robbing sociopath what happens when you wake up a Texas rancher with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Vivian Blackwood's final gambit proved she'd completely lost her mind along with her moral compass. Her private investigator, despite looking like he'd flunked out of Mall Cop Academy, finally earned his fee by discovering my ownership of Clearwater Municipal Utilities through courthouse records. Vivian's meltdown was visible from orbit. According to Tom's sources, she went full nuclear in the Heritage Meadows Community Center, screaming about water monopolies and criminal conspiracies while hurling her leather portfolio like a deranged quarterback. The sound of expensive Italian leather smacking against drywall echoed through the building as reality crashed down on her suburban empire. The smell of pure desperation was thick as burnt coffee when she convinced Bradford to file emergency injunctions against my water company. Her strategy was pure Hail Mary: claim I was monopolizing essential services for personal vendetta, and demand court-appointed receivership to steal control of my utility. Bradford's legal paperwork looked like it was drafted by a caffeinated law student during finals week. Motion after frantic motion flooded the courthouse. Prevent water termination, declare me mentally unstable, complaints to state utility commissioners about monopoly abuse. The man was throwing legal spaghetti at every wall, hoping something would stick before his wife's empire collapsed. But here's where Vivian's panic made her sloppy as a drunk carpenter attempting brain surgery. She decided to wage media warfare, staging a photo op that would make North Korean propaganda look subtle. Picture this: Vivian surrounded by worried mothers clutching their children like extras in a disaster movie, claiming I was holding innocent families hostage over a simple pipeline dispute. This unstable rancher threatens to cut off water to 1,200 families, she declared to Channel 8 News, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. Children could die of thirst because one bitter old man can't accept progress. The metallic taste of irony was sweeter than stolen honey. Here was a grave-desecrating, evidence-planting, bribe-offering criminal playing victim harder than a Las Vegas poker tournament. But Vivian's media circus became her own public execution when Rebecca Walsh requested immediate court hearings. Judge Patricia Hendricks, Margaret's cousin and a woman who'd survived 40 years of legal bullshit, was not amused by Bradford's shotgun approach to jurisprudence. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Hendricks said, her voice carrying the authority of Moses delivering commandments, "you've filed 17 motions in 3 days. Are you practicing law or starting a recycling center?" The courtroom was packed tighter than a county fair porta-potty, with Heritage Meadows residents, media vultures, and curious locals who'd caught wind of our water war. The struggling air conditioning mixed body heat with nervous energy, creating humidity that smelled like sweat and impending justice. Rebecca Walsh methodically presented our evidence like a surgeon performing an autopsy on Vivian's credibility. Video footage of criminal vandalism, financial records proving corruption, witness statements documenting systematic harassment. Each piece landed with surgical precision, dissecting Vivian's lies piece by piece. "Your Honor," Rebecca concluded, "Mrs. Blackwood claims Mr. Thompson abuses his water company ownership, but evidence shows he's provided reliable service for 30 years while she's engaged in criminal harassment, bribery, and grave desecration." The frantic clicking of Vivian's heels against marble sounded like a tap dancer having a seizure as she whispered desperate instructions to Bradford. Her designer armor couldn't hide stress fractures around her eyes, and her makeup couldn't disguise the body language of someone watching their world implode in high definition. Judge Hendricks's ruling was swift as a rattlesnake strike. "Mr. Thompson's utility has operated without complaint for 3 decades. Mrs. Blackwood's allegations appear retaliatory. All injunctions against Clearwater Municipal are denied." But here's my knockout punch that Vivian never saw coming. While she was busy playing courtroom drama, I'd been executing the final phase of my master plan. Water termination notices were drafted for every HOA board member, citing legitimate contract violations and unpaid bills totaling $45,000. Alternative water trucks were positioned throughout Heritage Meadows like military supply convoys. Most devastatingly, I'd secretly coordinated with Margaret's reasonable faction, now controlling 65% of Heritage Meadows residents, to file mass complaints against the current HOA board. Turns out, when you give people permission to rebel against tyranny, they embrace it like Christmas morning. "Emergency board recall election scheduled for next Tuesday," Margaret announced outside the courthouse, her teacher voice carrying across the crowd like a battle horn. "Vivian Blackwood's reign of suburban terror ends now." The media feeding frenzy was beautiful to watch. Local news crews surrounded Vivian like hungry sharks as she stumbled toward her BMW, designer heels clicking frantically against asphalt while reporters shouted questions about criminal charges, financial corruption, and grave desecration. As we left the courthouse, Vivian's eyes held the hollow look of Napoleon watching Moscow burn, someone who'd finally realized she was playing chess with a grandmaster while holding nothing but plastic checkers. The final battle awaited at Tuesday's county commissioners' meeting, where her empire would die in front of cameras, witnesses, and the entire community she'd terrorized. Checkmate was one move away. Tuesday evening, the Williamson County Commission chambers filled up like a megachurch during tornado warnings. Every seat was occupied, people stood 3 deep against walls, and the overflow crowd spilled into hallways like floodwater through broken levees. The air conditioning groaned under 400 angry humans, creating humidity that reeked of sweat, anticipation, and approaching justice. TV crews deployed their equipment like a media invasion force. Channel 8's Sarah Pettigrew, Tom's daughter, positioned cameras for maximum dramatic carnage, while newspaper photographers crouched like predators stalking wounded prey. The metallic symphony of clicking cameras and whirring equipment would soundtrack Vivian's political execution. Vivian arrived fashionably late in her pristine BMW, probably expecting some grand entrance that would magically salvage her imploding reputation. She strutted through the parking lot wearing a power suit that cost more than most people's cars, clutching her leather portfolio like it contained salvation instead of legal fiction that wouldn't survive a high school debate. Bradford shuffled behind her like a beaten dog, expensive shoes clicking nervously against concrete, while he whispered what sounded like funeral arrangements disguised as legal strategy. The man's face had achieved that particular shade of green lawyers get when they realize their client is about to become a cautionary tale. I entered quietly through the side door with my truth-telling army: Margaret, Dr. Walsh, Tom, and Rebecca Walsh. We carried documentation that could bury a small government, and the metallic taste of approaching victory was sweet as aged bourbon. Commissioner Rodriguez gavelled the meeting to order with judicial authority. Tonight we address Heritage Meadows pipeline proposal and related disputes between the HOA and Mr. Ezra Thompson. Vivian launched her opening gambit with the desperation of a drowning swimmer grabbing for concrete life preservers. Commissioners, this essential infrastructure serves 1,200 families deserving reliable water access. Mr. Thompson is terrorizing our community by threatening water cutoffs out of pure vindictive spite. She produced petition sheets with more fake signatures than a Soviet election, claiming overwhelming community support for her pipeline scheme. Her voice cracked with manufactured emotion as she painted herself as defender of children against my monopolistic terrorism. The crowd buzzed with electricity. 400 people who'd come to witness a public crucifixion, and Vivian was about to nail herself to the cross. When my moment arrived, I stood slowly, letting 73 years and 5 generations of Texas heritage settle on my shoulders like ancestral armor. The chamber fell silent, except for mechanical camera hums and the nervous breathing of witnesses to history. Mrs. Blackwood claims I'm threatening community water supplies, I said, my voice carrying through the chamber without amplification, steady as bedrock. But here's what she forgot to mention. I've been providing clean water to this community for 30 years. The audience gasped like air escaping from a punctured balloon. Half the room hadn't known about my utility ownership, and the revelation hit them like a physical punch. While I've ensured reliable water service for 3 decades, I continued, voice hardening like tempered steel, Mrs. Blackwood's HOA has been poisoning groundwater with chemical runoff, terrorizing residents with illegal harassment, and, my voice dropped to deadly quiet, desecrating graves in my family cemetery. The silence was deafening. You could hear heartbeats and camera shutters clicking like mechanical crickets. Rebecca Walsh unleashed our evidence arsenal with surgical precision. Criminal vandalism footage, corruption financial records, contamination environmental studies, harassment witness statements. Each revelation landed like artillery shells on Vivian's credibility, leaving smoking craters where her reputation used to be. Dr. Walsh testified about environmental health disasters from HOA chemicals. Margaret spoke for terrorized Heritage Meadows residents. Tom presented surveillance and intimidation evidence that would embarrass totalitarian regimes. But the execution shot came when Sheriff Rodriguez announced criminal charges. Mrs. Blackwood faces felony counts for evidence tampering, criminal harassment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Bradford Blackwood faces state bar investigation for ethics violations and confidentiality breaches. The sound of Vivian's world imploding was audible. Sharp breath intake followed by metallic portfolio clatter as her hands went nerveless. Designer makeup couldn't hide color draining from her face like blood from a severed artery. "This is a conspiracy!" she shrieked, composure shattering like glass hitting pavement. "That bitter old fossil is destroying progress out of spite." The crowd erupted, cheers, boos, cameras flashing like lightning strikes. Heritage Meadows residents who'd suffered under her tyranny stood applauding while others sat stunned at the complete character assassination they'd just witnessed. Commissioner Rodriguez's gavel fell with coffin nail finality. Pipeline proposal permanently denied. State Environmental Agency will investigate Heritage Meadows contamination immediately. Mrs. Blackwood, seek legal counsel. You'll need it. The media feeding frenzy was poetry in motion. Reporters swarming, cameras flashing, Vivian stumbling toward exits while Bradford desperately tried controlling damage that couldn't be controlled. Justice tasted sweeter than Sarah's Sunday cobbler as I watched 30 years of quiet service triumph over suburban fascism. The tyrant queen was dead. Long live the liberated community. The aftermath was sweeter than Christmas morning in a candy factory. Within 2 weeks, Vivian and Bradford Blackwood became poster children for how to destroy your life through suburban fascism. Federal fraud charges hit them harder than a Texas tornado, with prosecutors practically drooling over evidence that made their case easier than fishing in a stocked pond. Their financial empire collapsed faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The Heritage Meadows mansion, mortgaged twice to fund their lifestyle of suburban imperialism, entered foreclosure while Bradford's law practice evaporated like morning dew in August heat. Last anyone heard, they'd relocated to Bradford's mother's double-wide in Oklahoma, trading their BMW for a rusted pickup that probably runs on desperation and expired credit cards. Heritage Meadows residents voted to dissolve their HOA board with the enthusiasm of prisoners escaping Alcatraz. Margaret Hendricks was elected community president on a platform of never again, implementing policies that would make the Constitution weep with joy. Property values didn't collapse as Vivian predicted. Turns out families prefer communities where petty dictators can't fine you for planting tomatoes. The pipeline project died permanently when EPA investigators discovered chemical contamination levels that would embarrass a toxic waste dump. Cleanup orders will keep environmental lawyers busy until my great-grandchildren retire, while Vivian's brother-in-law's water bottling scheme evaporated faster than spilled beer on hot pavement. My ranch mortgage mysteriously became current after federal banking investigators discovered Morrison's discriminatory lending practices. Amazing how quickly banks rediscover customer service when facing regulators armed with subpoenas and attitudes. The $2.3 million insurance settlement from the Blackwoods didn't hurt either. Money that would honor Sarah's memory perfectly. Clearwater Municipal Utilities transformed into a model operation that would make water engineers jealous. Smart meters detect leaks before disasters. Partnerships with Texas AANDM advance watershed research. And sliding scale rates ensure families never choose between water and groceries. The system earned state recognition for rural water innovation. The most meaningful change was establishing the Sarah Thompson Memorial Foundation, with settlement money that felt like justice converted into hope. The foundation provides college scholarships for rural students studying environmental science, funds water testing for underserved communities, and partners with extension services for sustainable agriculture education. Every scholarship letter explains how their education was funded by fighting suburban tyranny, turning Vivian's harassment into opportunities for the next generation of environmental stewards. Sarah always believed education could change the world. Now her memory makes it happen. The ranch became a living laboratory for sustainable agriculture. 200 acres of protected wildlife habitat, invasive species removal, and heritage cattle breeding preserved genetic diversity that factory farms nearly destroyed. Educational tours bring students to learn ranching practices that work with nature instead of against it. The sound of children's laughter where Vivian once planned pipeline destruction feels like Sarah's spirit celebrating from heaven. Their excitement about conservation makes every battle worthwhile. Last spring's inaugural Clearwater Days Festival celebrated water conservation, sustainable agriculture, and community resilience. Local businesses thrive from tourism, environmental groups showcase watershed protection, and families enjoy activities without HOA approval requirements. I quietly donate all profits to infrastructure improvements, real community leadership instead of pocket-lining schemes. Personal healing came slowly, like sunrise over Texas hills. The renovated homestead serves as an environmental education center where Sarah's memory lives through positive action rather than bitter grievance. Justice, my rescue dog from the shelter, provides daily companionship while I maintain the land Sarah loved most. Margaret and I spend evenings sharing stories and homemade pie on the front porch, friendship built on mutual battles and respect. The smell of her cinnamon rolls mixes with prairie wind and cattle lowing in the distance. Sarah would approve of companionship without replacement. Our legal victory helps property owners nationwide facing HOA overreach. The Clearwater decision appears in water rights cases from California to Florida, while our story supports legislative testimony about HOA liability limits. But the sweetest victory is morning coffee on my front porch, watching heritage cattle graze on land that will never be bulldozed for suburban profit. The taste of freedom mixed with Texas spring water reminds me daily that sometimes David really does beat Goliath. Drop your HOA horror story in the comments and smash that subscribe button for more tales of ordinary folks fighting corruption and winning. Coming next week, town council tried to steal my food truck, so I ran for mayor and fired them all. Because in America, justice flows as sweet and pure as Texas spring water.